Hello again, and welcome to the 17th episode of the podcast, Simple Enlightenment. I'm your host, Dean Graves. We greet you in the love and the light of the one infinite Creator. Beginning with the cosmic mind of seventh density, the environmental refinements of each fractal and/or diversification assumes a racial mind quality. For example, raw, or love, is an inherent characteristic of the Creator, but it is still distinguishable from the other four inherent characteristics. The distinguishable qualities of love become manifest into the experiences of behavioral characteristics and, relatively speaking, assume racial qualities that define the nature of a mind by fractalization of the original template. In the creator being densities, the behavioral characteristics are only perceptible because of an awareness of higher consciousness, but as consciousness is increasingly intoxicated with free will, the distinguishable characteristics become ever more apparent. The same is true of each of the other four inherent characteristics, and the racial qualities of each become further refined with each new diversification or dilution. Paradoxically, even in the lower densities, the delineation of an inherent characteristic does not isolate or completely segregate that characteristic from the other four aspects. In other words, law, or wisdom, is still love, stillness, unity, and awareness. But the dominance of consciousness is that of law, which is what provides the racial aspect and the diversity of experience interpretation. The dominance of the mind as the prominent aspect of the mind-body-spirit makes the racial mind qualities possible, and the concept of segregating consciousness into a mind-body-spirit begins in the seventh density, and is further fractalized into the sixth density with the fractal creation of the root mind. Sixth density's root mind is created within the flavoring of a racial mind of the seventh density inherent characteristic. In addition to the additional 26 distortions that are created in sixth density and become archetypes at this level, experience below sixth density becomes even more diverse because intelligence itself becomes a variable. In the mind-body spirits of sixth and seventh creator being densities, intelligence is indistinguishable from the corpus of the mind, which means that all sixth and seventh density consciousness shares exactly the same access to intelligence capabilities. When the root mind is fractalized into the deep mind, consciousness emerges with the ability to segregate intelligence from the corpus of the mind and make it a variable. Varying intelligence within mind-body spirits makes every experience infinitely more diverse, in addition to the already infinite diversity afforded by changes in consciousness level, the environment, and a variety of catalysts. Free will intoxication fractalizes consciousness and creates the mind along a vertical scale, with each new fractal behaving in a manner less in line with the original source, but essentially the same as every other aspect of consciousness fractalized to that degree of intoxication. The chakra system, the time-space body, is incorporated into the design of consciousness's experiences, which allows consciousness with the exact same placement along the vertical scale to interpret experiences according to analogy, or what it prefers, which allows consciousness to explore itself along both a horizontal and a diagonal scale. When access to intelligence is made a variable in the experiential and foundational densities, consciousness is able to explore itself along an unstructured fourth measurement, of which is difficult for us to illustrate other than as an untethered cloud overlaying the first three scales. The vertical scale is the exploration of the self according to awareness. The horizontal scale is the exploration according to love. The diagonal scale is the exploration according to wisdom, and the unstructured fourth measurement is an expansion beyond the confines of a scale in the exploration according to unity. There is still a fifth measurement that is even more difficult to conceive of, that is the exploration according to stillness. The combination of distortions of consciousness allow the creator to know itself by experiencing itself completely and deeply, because it is the infinitely incremental exploration of infinity according to the inherent characteristics. In third density, after opening the heart chakra and activating the spirit portion of the mind body spirit, consciousness begins to be able to intuitively directly experience the creator. It becomes awareness and is able to learn of the inherent characteristics through the lens of awareness. Until such time as consciousness sufficiently surrenders free will to allow itself to have a direct intuitive experience, it is primarily repeating the cycle of collecting more of what it doesn't like by relying upon a limited and variable access to intelligence to make it more successful in a minute-by-minute, immediately gratifying but pyrrhic battle for increased energy in order to feel better. The archetypical mind is designed for the foundational and experiential densities because it directs and motivates consciousness to explore the inherent characteristics based upon what it prefers, but restricts it from wandering too far off the desired path of evolution. There is a dramatic difference in the purpose, function, and abilities of each foundational or experiential density, but the archetypical mind is designed to serve each of these densities without change. That is, the design of the archetypical mind doesn't change, but the experiencing consciousness changes, and, consequently, how the archetypical mind serves the journey through the evolution in each density level is significantly different. The ego mind. The archetypical mind and the deep mind serve all 5 foundational and experiential densities, but third density primarily contends with significant conditions created by the archetypical mind that intentionally obscure the deep mind. The deep mind is obscured within the foundational densities too, but the awareness and intelligence of consciousness within these densities makes it self-limiting. Within third density, the archetypical mind creates the ego mind, which serves as a veneer over the deep mind and occludes the deep mind from detection until we begin to intentionally explore the self below the surface of the daily village life. The veneer of a mind, called the ego or rational logical mind, is steeped in the illusion of the distortions and conditions intentionally devised by the archetypical mind, which deceptively endears a third density graduation candidate to its fantasies of the authenticity of the distortions and or conditions. The beginning fantasies or conditions are significant and severe, and a belief in their authenticity becomes intensified as the mind-body-spirit begins to have experiences through processed thoughts. An attachment to the authenticity of the beginning conditions by design is how all consciousness begins its third density journey. The conditions include ignorance, innocence, primordial darkness, constant movement or change, and several others, but the effect is that the unit of consciousness beginning the journey is wiped clean of any biases that could contaminate the uniqueness of its experience of third density. The condition of innocence is intensified by causing the mind-body-spirit to be mentally and consequently physically in constant motion. While consciousness remains within the lower dimensions of the density, movement promotes chaos and is a foundational condition of third density consciousness in the universe of our shared experience. But it is also a basic mechanism that directs an organism to explore itself through interactions with other consciousness and its environment. Innocence and movement are cornerstones of the ego mind and significantly contribute to the creation of consciousness's unique pattern. Movement is change, and it is necessary to experience constant change in order to employ analogy. The mechanism consciousness uses to choose what it likes over what it doesn't like. The first, third, and fifth densities and first, third, and fifth chakras are considered primary levels. First density begins in complete dispersion and concludes with relative unity as consciousness coalesces into a planet. Third density begins as dispersion, with consciousness experiencing an independent identity in isolation, and concludes with it becoming awareness and surrendering the independent identity perspective. Fifth density begins with the initial perspective of a social memory complex comprised of a multitude of individual mind, body, spirits, and concludes with the social memory complexes bonding into unity in graduation to the unity of sixth density. Consciousness in the experience of third density begins with the mind portion of the mind body spirit within the archetypical mind being programmed to perceive of itself as independent of every other mind body spirit, the creator, and holding an I perspective. The ego is predicated upon this perception that a person is separate and independent in creation and must figure out how to survive and prosper. The ego mind develops from the resulting mindset created by high levels of intoxication of free will that causes a mind-body spirit operating with a reduced flow of intelligent energy to believe that it is completely separate from the creator, innocent, and dealing with constant change. The ego mind allows the creation of fear, which is a distortion and the antithesis of love, and allows consciousness to explore what it doesn't like, so that it may discern what it does like. The ego mind is the initially dominant mind that interprets thoughts, while consciousness remains within the lower dimensions of the density. It also guides a person from innocence to awakening by directing it to experience repeated pain and suffering. A mind-body spirit experiences primarily what it doesn't like while it remains under its umbrella. The nature of its experience is the result of an aggregate of conditions that cumulatively serve as a negative motivation for it to evolve in the form of pain and suffering. It is the stick that drives it forward, motivating it to escape pain and or suffering until it tastes the carrot and shifts its motivation from avoiding the negative to seeking more of the positive. While consciousness remains within the confines of the ego mind and perceives of itself as separate from the creator, it will perceive of itself as a victim. There are 3 stages of victimhood, and consciousness will cycle through the 3 stages, which begin with the common view of the world as hostile, making it necessary for it to constantly battle for survival. Victimhood progresses from playing on the battleground as a loser to playing the ground as a winner, when it improves its playing skills and becomes an aggressor. The 3rd stage of victimhood, the stage before it begins to surrender the ego mind into the deep mind, is the rescuer, when its perceptions are focused towards the need to rescue others from the battlefield, transforming the center of its focus from the self to others. The battle raging among consciousness, because of the limited perceptions of the ego mind or minds, is a product of the limitations and confines of the lower 3 time-space chakras and the distortions created by the archetypical mind. The process of surrendering the ego mind to the deep mind coincides with the beginning of the heart chakra opening and radiation of love in thought processes, instead of vacillating between radiating and absorbing the energy. The ego mind, the interpreter and promulgator of pain and suffering, will be surrendered soon after graduation to 4th density if consciousness is polarizing service to others. If it is choosing to polarize service to self, the calamities created by the ego mind become enhanced, and the ego mind is not surrendered until it cycles through the service to self evolutionary process to find itself returning to the evolutionary point of departure where it dropped out of school. Mind-body spirits can flirt with the connection to the deep mind in 3rd density as it awakens and intentionally works to raise its consciousness, But being out of the ego mind and fully within the territory of the deep mind usually doesn't occur until after some tenure in fourth density. A mind body spirit can intuitively connect to the deep mind when it retreats to the guru's cave while in meditation. It is between the thoughts attracted and processed with the ego mind that it sinks into the awareness of the deep mind and begins to have direct intuitive experiences of the Creator. Through the deep mind, consciousness spiritually advances and accrues knowledge of the inherent characteristics, incorporates that knowledge into its beingness, and carries it forward from lifetime to lifetime. Clinging to the ego mind perpetuates its stay within the wheel of samsara, but surrendering it sets it free from the cycle of pain and suffering. Developing awareness by becoming awareness surpasses the confines of the ego mind when it awakens the spirit portion of its mind-body spirit and activates the fourth time-space heart chakra. Transcending minds. The archetypical mind facilitates the conditions of the ego mind from the beginning of consciousness's introduction into the evolutionary process. It is the mind that completely perceives itself as separate from the Creator and contributes to the creation of the I perspective. We have described the service to self path as holding a different philosophy than service to others, but the philosophy is founded upon the archetypical mind's creation of the ego mind and the resulting fear of surrendering the ego to a unity perspective that spawns its creation. The service to self path is founded upon the ignorance of the fallacy of the identity's authenticity and fear of its loss of identity. As consciousness graduates to the fourth density service to others experience, attachment to the ego mind decreases, and the deep mind, or spirit, emerges more prominently as the dominant portion of the mind-body spirit. Even in third density, as consciousness progresses in polarization towards service to others and alignment with the higher self, it begins to lessen the domination of the ego mind and begins to experience the connection to the deep mind. Development of inward awareness is the tool that allows a mind-body spirit to surrender the ego mind's white-knuckled grip and begins to open the fourth heart chakra and awaken the spirit. The ego mind keeps consciousness attached to the authenticity of the physical and tied to the lower dimensions of the density. Only when it begins to surrender the ego mind is it able to experience the qualities of the inherent characteristics of the Creator through the lens of awareness and allow them to become more a radiant part of the self. A rising tide lifts all boats, and this occurs simultaneously with the opening of the heart chakra, which only occurs for those polarizing to the service to others path. Even in third density, the deep mind, which is the same as the cosmic mind, stepped down to the capabilities of consciousness within the experiential densities, serves as background music to the ego mind. It is always there, waiting for a mind-body spirit to recognize it, pay attention, and allow its melodic harmonies to pervade its awareness. Obtaining an understanding of the workings of the archetypical mind aids a mind-body spirit in the process of transforming the ego mind and becoming aware that the deep mind is the subtle backdrop to its entire experience of third density. Unlike the ego mind, consciousness never transcends the deep mind. The deep mind expands from the limitations of fourth density awareness into fifth density awareness. From fifth density, it grows and expands into the root mind of sixth density, and eventually into the cosmic mind of seventh and eighth density. Truth is infinite and an unchanging constant, never varying from its completeness. However, consciousness' capacity to be aware of truth varies with its degree of sobering from its free will intoxication, and its surrendering of its attachment to the distortions. The mind is the discovery tool that allows the creator to observe and experience itself, thereby learn of itself. It is through the mind that consciousness rediscovers truth and knows itself as the truth in which it swims. The thought cycle. The archetypical mind is the design for how a thought is processed, and the processing of a thought is how experience is accomplished through a subject-object interaction. Upon completion of the processing of the thought, and prior to the attraction of the next thought, a mind-body-spirit becomes a point-in-time fractal of the Creator. It is modified from the previous pattern of consciousness by adding the fruit of the newly completed thought to create a new pattern of consciousness, albeit a possibly minutely perceptible modification. The exploration of infinity is accomplished infinitely through incremental steps. The archetypical mind that Earth experiences creates 7 conditions at the beginning of the evolutionary journey. Consciousness processes thoughts throughout its tenure in the lower 5 densities, but beginning midway through the 3rd density, it will begin to work and overcome these 7 conditions, which will allow it to potentially experience greater truth in every succeeding thought. The 7 conditions created by the archetypical mind create the illusions or conditions that make the experiential densities possible, and define the evolutionary process for consciousness experiencing our solar system. We have already disclosed the creation of the ego mind and referenced the I perspective as 2 of the conditions created. The other 5 conditions created include the perceptions of space as a volume, perception and authenticity of physicality, motion, bodily health or illness, and ego-defining biases and prejudices. The lower the consciousness, the more adamantly the 3rd density mind-body-spirit adheres to the authenticity of a physical world experience and supports the perception that its existence is irrefutable. The 7 conditions are either reinforced or reduced with the process of every thought. While consciousness remains within the foundational or experiential densities, the processing of a thought consists of a mind-body-spirit, first, beginning as a pattern of consciousness, second, attracting a thought, third, processing a thought, 4, modifying the pattern of consciousness by the incorporation of the fruit of the process results, and 5, attraction of another thought to repeat the cycle based upon the condition of the newly modified pattern of consciousness. For every thought that we attract, the process is repeated until it completes a full cycle through the archetypical mind. While we remain within the foundational or experiential densities, there is never a point when a thought is not somewhere in the process. This means that we experience the archetypical mind structure in both space-time, while we are incarnate, and time-space, while we are in between lives. The process is infinitely repeated and can be illustrated as either an ascending or descending spiral. Ideally, the modification will incrementally create an ascending spiral and bring the mind-body-spirit more in alignment with the higher self by reduction of the belief in the irrefutability of the conditions. In this case, the processing of the next thought will reveal greater truth than the one before. However, this is not a requirement and seldom works so ideally until we awaken, open the 4th chakra, and begin to surrender the authenticity of the conditions or distortions. The spiral in the Earth experience has frequently become more of a repeating flat circle because of the chaotic battle between service to self and service to others factions. This has created a condition of spiritual entropy. The cycle can become a descending spiral, moving the object further away from alignment with the higher self, which results in increased fear and polarization towards service to self. The direction through evolution is chosen by the individual mind-body-spirit, but the direction is seldom consistent until it makes an aware choice of whether it will polarize positively or negatively. The body and the archetypical mind. As part of the design of the archetypical mind, a mind-body spirit chooses the healthy functioning of the body with every thought processed. The incarnate body is part of the timeline chosen to experience the incarnation, but the health and/or physical condition of the incarnate body is a manifestation of the choices made. For most people, the body paraded around during incarnation becomes a monitor for the choice of balance between the ego mind and the spiritual deep mind. The walking around body of space-time, the analog projection of our time-space self, is only a costume donned to play the timeline role being experienced. The time-space self also has an enduring body which, in the experiential densities, consists of the yellow, green, or blue-ray body that will remain throughout the evolutionary journey and reflect the pattern of consciousness created through experiences. The costume bodies, the analog projection into space-time, will die at the appropriate time and disappear with the termination of the character role being portrayed. The archetypical mind in space-time and time-space. While consciousness remains within the experiential densities, there's no period that it isn't within the guiding influence of the archetypical mind. For most mind-body spirits incarnate in third density, the only perception employed is from within the timelines and subject to the conditions of the archetypical mind, unless extra effort is exerted to more fully awaken from the dream, which is possible. As consciousness ascends through the densities, the archetypical mind holds less sway on the processing of thoughts, or, in other words, consciousness begins to peer through the dense fog of the ego mind. The ancient spiritual teachers describe consciousness's participation in creation to be a dream within a dream within a dream. The innermost dream, the most familiar, is space-time, when the analog projection is repeatedly incarnating within a timeline, and its perspective is the most restrictive phase of the third density experience. Dream number 2 is consciousness's experience of time-space, when it remains within the archetypical mind, but its awareness isn't limited to an incarnate identity or the timelines. Dream number 1 is the experience of creation from the vantage point of infinity, which is the matrix of creation in the environment of 8th density. Each and every time consciousness becomes more aware, it increases its level of consciousness in increments, which is synonymous with becoming more aligned with the higher self. Each increase in consciousness level is an experiencing and inclusion of more dimensions into the awareness field. Eventually, these small increases in awareness add up to the major mystical abilities that transcend the conditions of the archetypical mind, such as confounding the natural laws. This concludes episode 17, and we thank you for listening. If you are enjoying these presentations, we ask that you go to our website at podcastenlightenment.org to download the transcript of this episode and a chart of the modules of the archetypical mind, which offers some illustrations that may aid your further comprehension of the material and will be particularly helpful to following the future episodes. While at the website, we ask that you take a moment to make a donation, because Simple Enlightenment is entirely listener-funded, and we rely upon the generosity of listeners like you to keep us going. Also, please like and share us on your favorite social media sites. Our objective is to elevate the world's consciousness by providing truthful information. If you have not incorporated a daily spiritual practice into your routine, including time for meditation and contemplation, we encourage you to do so. The behavior of the world's population is changed through the efforts of each individual to escalate their own level of consciousness, and the healing of your own distortions through awareness allows you to experience greater joy and happiness. Until next time, we leave you in the love and the light of the One Infinite Creator. Theme music provided by Dr. Ken Wendt.